This week in e-learning 3.0, we're discussing the topic of community. And you've probably read the summary and looked a little bit under the hood so far at the topic. Today, I've got Wikipedia expert and I guess aficionado as well, Pete Forsyth with me, and we'll be talking about consensus, community, how we make decisions, and I guess how we create knowledge as a community. So Pete, welcome to e-learning 3.0.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we keep things pretty informal in these conversations. We're talking about community, and in the introduction to the discussion of community in our e-learning 3.0 course, I broached the idea of community as consensus. And Wikipedia, of course, is one of the areas where consensus is one of the, I guess, underlying values. What would you say is the relation between community and consensus, or is there one?
Good question. I think at the most basic level, consensus is sort of a collection of tactics for making decisions, and community is, I think, a more sort of amorphous concept of affiliation. But I think the connection probably lies in if you're able to form consensus, then that's probably one of the key elements of forming community. If you can have agreement about things, then that's a very important aspect of people affiliating with one another.
So when I read about community, I read about a couple of things a lot. One aspect of community that a lot of people talk about is trust, but the internet is a trustless environment. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think trust as a broad concept. I agree with your assessment. The internet is a trustless environment in that we're interacting with many more people than we did without the internet, and the possibility of having any basis for broad trust in huge numbers of people is a big challenge. I think the way that Wikipedia tends to look at it, and what's worked fairly well there, is to kind of break it up into a much more, I would say, Aristotelian concept of trust. It's like, if I trust you to do, I trust you about this thing, or I trust this fact that you've told me, as opposed to I trust you as a person writ large. And so the way that kind of plays out in Wikipedia is that's both between among people working on Wikipedia, and also that's our contract with the reader. So if I say the sky is blue on Wikipedia, I wouldn't expect you to believe that. But if I say the sky is blue and I can cite a paper from 1897 that's been cited by academics many times since, then maybe that's a fact that you would have some trust in. If you see that footnote, then maybe just the fact that you see a footnote at all gives you a little more trust in it. Then if you're really a little more interested in that point, you can go and do the research yourself. So what I've done is sort of given you a guide towards a fact rather than strongly asserting it myself and expecting you to believe it just because I asserted it.
But that sounds to me just like you're pushing the problem one step back, really, aren't you?
Well, yes, and I think, isn't that what an encyclopedia has always done? The idea that a general work would be kind of an ultimate authority in many details is, I think is maybe a little too ambitious for the medium. So I do think Wikipedia has certainly emphasized having specific footnotes more than other publications, but I think it's very much for the reason that we don't expect the reading public to have a strong sense of trust in a publication that literally anyone can change at any time.
Yeah, that when I look at other encyclopedias, the author of the article will be very strongly associated with,
That's
with
right.
the article.
Right, but we don't have a mechanism for establishing individual authority that way. So if the Encyclopedia Britannica says this person is an expert in biology, then presumably they have a basis for saying that, and there was a decision-making process that went into it. We don't have those kinds of decision-making processes with Wikipedia.
But you do have a decision-making process about what sources you'll trust. You must have, because you wouldn't cite just any source.
Yeah, and I think it's that is kind of where the emphasis has gone within Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
I think the results are very much open to debate, but that's a big part of what Wikipedia is. Wikipedia generally defines a reliable source as being independent from the topic. So, and all of these, the way that I understand them is basically as gradients. Some people look at it more as black and white, but I think it's better to look at it as a gradient. So, if a company puts out a press release and the press release says this is the best company, in this industry, then that's not particularly useful. But if a newspaper that's been around for a number of decades and has some principles around conflicts of interest and has worked to establish its own trust with its audience, if they pick that up and say that this is the best company in that industry, and they also quote some experts that don't work for the company, then that's considered a reliable source by Wikipedia.
What if they're owned by the company?
If the newspaper is owned by the company,
then
then that would absolutely be a strike against it. So all of these kinds of decisions Wikipedians can get very focused on the details around them. So there's a lot that might not get noticed, but if someone notices something and brings it up for discussion, then you can really have a very extensive conversation about which sources should be trusted for a certain article and which ones shouldn't.
So there's a few things in your. I'm getting a bit of echo from your side.
Oh, I'm going to turn my volume down. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. It's the system performing as designed.
Yeah.
There's a few components here in what you just said, right? One is independence from the topic area, and that's a really hard one to nail down. Nobody who's writing in an academic environment is independent from the topic area. Usually they're very involved and engaged in the topic area. Another thing that you mentioned was the I forget the exact phrase you used, but statement of principles or code of values, etc. And I know of a lot of publications who don't actually have one. I know of even more that have one but don't follow it. And thirdly, publications that have one, but one that is wholly inadequate. Let's take a case study here. Russia Today. Is Russia Today a source that you would cite on Wikipedia?
I would imagine not. I would say I'm not deeply familiar with Russia Today. Like my sense of it is that it's basically a propaganda arm of the Russian state. But I'd kind of hesitate to go into a lot of detail because that's not really an opinion that I've vetted thoroughly, and I haven't worked on articles that would tend to say.
How about the Wall Street Journal?
The Wall Street Journal, I think, would generally be considered a reliable source. Certainly, I think a Wikipedian would tend to look at would tend to draw a strong distinction between the opinion content of the Wall Street Journal and the editorial content, which have different processes. And again, I think the topic in question is a big part of that assessment. Right. So if the Wall Street Journal is talking about the top companies in a certain technology niche, it would probably be considered a reliable source for that. If the Wall Street Journal was talking about Rupert Murdoch, then we would want to look at some other sources as well, because there's an ownership question there.
Yeah, but you'd probably still cite them on it.
It ends up being a very granular thing. So if it was just a pretty straight factual claim, sometimes the organization itself is the best source for sort of straightforward, uncontroversial facts about itself, because they're the only ones that would know that, and it's not the kind of thing that you would really worry about. Like a good example of that might be an individual saying what their birthday is. Well, if they're a film actor, then maybe that is something that people tend to fudge in that industry. But if it's just you or me, why would we doubt that? So if someone has put on their personal website what their birth date is, then you'd probably put it in the Wikipedia article and not worry too much that it's only a self-sourced statement.
So then some Wikipedia articles then do cite personal websites then. That seems to follow from what you're saying.
Yeah, the idea that it's kind of a gradient is important. So there are many policy pages around these, and they're constantly evolving and improving. But one of the statements that I think is important is that exceptional claims require exceptional sources. So if you're going to say something that's really surprising and might be difficult for a lot of readers to believe, that's where you really need to make sure that you've done some good research and found the very best available sources for it and have a high degree of confidence.
So let's look at the decision-making process itself. Certainly in the pages on consensus, I'm still getting some echo here. Certainly on the pages about consensus, we read that you prefer consensus as opposed to democracy because voting doesn't really address differences of opinion very well. I'm broadly paraphrasing.
Yeah.
So what is that mechanism? In terms of, in the nuts and bolts, how does that work?
Well, I think the most important aspect of it that people might not see unless you've participated is that it tends to be a very establishing that there is conflict over a question and coming to a decision is a pretty fluid process. So there's an essay that I really like called "Be Bold, Revert, and Discuss," and I can put a link in the chat.
Yeah, please.
And this is a essentially that essay describes a process that has generally worked well on Wikipedia, and I think has worked well on wikis more broadly, which is that you should, if you have something you want to add or a change that you want to make, the first thing you should do is be bold about it, is trust your own instincts, is, if I feel that this is an improvement, I'm going to make it. And then if you see that someone else has made a change that seems surprising or inappropriate or something like that, the first thing you should do is just undo it. And those actions, that pair of actions, that's the thing that signals to both of us that there's something that we might need to discuss. So rather than starting off by doing all the work of framing something up for discussion and trying to attract people to that discussion and trying to figure out what a quorum is and trying to make sure that minority voices are properly represented, rather than doing all of that work, just make the change. And if it turns out that everybody in the world basically agrees with you that it's an improvement, then you saved yourself a whole lot of headache. You saved everybody from a discussion that didn't need to be had. So, if that's sort of the kernel of where a decision would be made, you can imagine how it might start off as just a disagreement between you and me. I think that this paragraph needs to be added to this article, and you think that it's a bunch of hooey and there's no basis for believing it's true. Well, if we can resolve that disagreement just between the two of us, why bother a bunch of other people with it? If we can just talk it through and you understand that the source that I cited is actually, it's better than you thought it was. You thought it was just someone's personal blog. And then once I kind of point out a couple of things about it, you realize that it's a much more serious publication than you thought it was. And now you agree with me, then we can just move on. if as we're going through that discussion, our disagreement is only escalating, maybe a third person comes along. Maybe that disagreement is really just more of a personal, sort of a clash of personalities. Maybe a third person comes along and is sort of able to help us realize that and kind of get things back to the important stuff. And then the three of us all do come to an agreement. And again, we've saved a bunch of people from having to get involved. But then if the more kind of people get into it and the more effort we put into trying to resolve it, it only escalates. That's where you get to a point where you might call for a more formal discussion. And you might say, Pete says this article should be deleted. Stephen thinks it should be kept. There's been a whole bunch of discussion about it. Now we're going to take 7 days and we're going to advertise this in a few venues and let anyone who wants come along and give their reason, which should be rooted in Wikipedia policies of why it should be kept or why it should be deleted, and then try to figure out at the end of that what the consensus is.
Yeah, I'm glad you said advertise in a few venues, because it sounds like a lot of disputes get resolved on the basis of nobody else knows that they're happening.
Yeah.
That strikes me as concerning.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not hard to envision a case where, for example, somebody edits an article, being bold, as you say, and cites a source which turns out to be, say, a white supremacist newspaper, right, and nobody notices.
So I think, if I could kind of take a step back from that question, mm-hmm. I think what this really comes down to is there's a strong sense internally among Wikipedia editors. I think there's sort of two visions of Wikipedia.
Okay.
One is as a publication on a par to some degree with other big publications. It's the 5th most read website in the world, has been for 10 years or so. So maybe we look at Wikipedia as kind of a peer of the Wall Street Journal or, a major academic publishing house or something like that, and mm-hmm. and consider it from that framing. And from that perspective, a lot of these questions, there's kind of no good answer to, because Wikipedia's structure does not, it was never built to be a peer of a serious publishing house that builds robust editorial policies and things like that. The other way to look at Wikipedia is that it is an ongoing effort to explore what's true and what's important. So that, to me, I think that's the more, I think that's the better. I think it's important to look at Wikipedia both ways, but if I had to pick, that's kind of the one that I lean towards. So instead of looking at Wikipedia as a publication that serves many millions, look at Wikipedia as it's sort of a public square where tens of thousands participate, and anyone else that wants to can as well, where we're trying to figure out what's true, trying to figure out what's important, and how to sort of place facts side by side and how to present them together. And we're sharing the outputs of those deliberations with anyone who wants to read. So our processes are not your questions about what's the best source and what's the best way to call a vote and reach the right people to arrive at an appropriate decision. Those are all great questions, and they're questions that I think Wikipedia editors struggle with on a daily basis and have for the last almost 20 years. And hopefully we're getting a bit better about it day to day, mm-hmm. but we make no claims that we're perfect.
Oh, and I wouldn't claim you're perfect either. I'm just kidding.
Well, okay. See, there's something we could agree
on. So I like the idea. I like the second version a lot more than the first. I think the first is actually problematic even for the publications themselves with their editorial processes, etc. But the question of determining what's important and what's true, I mean, that's a hard problem to solve. And we're looking at this problem on a society-wide basis these days. One of the recent things that you wrote about was about fake news and how Wikipedia has avoided all the controversies that have plagued things like Twitter and Facebook and the rest, precisely because of this consensus process. So is the answer to fake news a consensus process? Is fake news a consensus problem?
I would say the answer to fake news is developing and sort of maintaining the social muscles of deliberating what is true and what we trust. So, I think a lot of what we see around fake news is that big institutions making commitments that I think they'll always have a hard time fulfilling, that they will give us an authoritative answer to what's fake and what's real. And I think that approach is kind of fundamentally flawed. I think the real answer to something like fake news is that a critical mass of people in society need to be continually asking, should I trust this? How much should I trust this? What parts of this should I trust? What should I compare it with when I don't really trust it and I want to figure out whether what I'm reading is good or not? So, I grew up in sort of a pre-internet world. We had sort of these competing messages. There was sort of this sense that if something was in print, that it was probably true, that it was if you saw something on TV or heard something on the street, that wasn't as reliable as if you read it in a book or in a newspaper or something like that. Then we also had the concept that you shouldn't believe everything you read, and we sort of existed in that tension, and exploring that tension was sort of what I understood as an essential part of becoming an informed citizen. It's kind of up to every individual to figure out whether they should trust any given thing that they read. And to me, I think that Wikipedia is kind of the entity in the on the internet, in the information world these days, that's continually reminding us to pay attention to the sources that we're looking at. You'll hear people just colloquially, in a taxi or something like that, if they don't believe what someone else says, saying citation needed. It's a phrase that was made popular by Wikipedia, right? You read Wikipedia, pretty soon you're going to come across a tag that says citation needed. So I think that's a good example of how Wikipedia influences the way that we deliberate about knowledge. It helps us remember these principles, that you shouldn't necessarily believe something just because you read it, and there may be an important conversation to be had about what the source of that information is.
Yeah, I've never been comfortable with the citation needed tag. Well, because if it's in Wikipedia and Wikipedia is saying, well, you need a citation, my question is, why is it in Wikipedia? And then, why?
Well, I think there's a perfectly good answer to that. But I'm going to go back to that difference in framing between community versus publication. The answer of why it's in Wikipedia is because someone thought it should be there, and we should never really regard anything that's in Wikipedia as having more significance than that. The reason it's there is because someone thought it was a good idea for it to be there, and that someone could be any one of many tens of thousands of people.
Now, in one of your recent tweets, you caught somebody out saying, according to Wikipedia, such and such.
Yeah.
And your response was, and I quote this directly, "You should trust our sources, not us." And I wondered about that because, I get how what counts as a fact is based in a source, and we have been talking about that. But isn't trust in Wikipedia also a lot to do with the consensus process itself? In other words, shouldn't you actually trust Wikipedia?
Well, I think you should. Trust should always be rooted in understanding.
Yeah.
So if I have a relative who is, if like let's say I had a cousin that I've always been close with, who's a heroin addict. Do I trust him in my house for a couple days when I'm not home to like not steal my TV? Maybe not. Do I trust that he loves me? Maybe I do. That's like, so just having sort of an overall word trust isn't necessarily helpful, because it's really rooted in how much you understand something. So I think that Wikipedia has proven itself to be an important institution. It's been around for close to 20 years. It's been around since before Facebook or even MySpace or even Friendster. It's been around since before YouTube. It's sort of a dinosaur in internet years. And I think it's really important that people understand Wikipedia. People should I think it's important that any literate person should spend some time exploring the discussion pages on Wikipedia and the history tab, should learn to look at a view history screen and what the different links on it do. How do you compare the version from last week to the version from 6 months ago? I would describe these as important literacy skills, and those kinds of skills are the basis for knowing what kind of trust to have in Wikipedia. I think the tweet that you're mentioning, and that I actually had a whole blog post on it not too long ago, is it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when reporters or public figure people that we kind of look to for an understanding of how information works, use the phrase "according to Wikipedia" at all in any unironic context, without sort of an awareness that there is no entity of Wikipedia to trust or not trust. Wikipedia really is basically a platform. Wikipedia is a piece of technology that enables many people to deliberate and make some decisions and assert some things. But if a Wikipedia article says the sky is blue, that's not it's not really appropriate to say, well, I believe the sky is blue because Wikipedia told me so. Wikipedia should be citing some other sources, and you can make a determination by going to those sources. Are these sources I want to trust? Do I trust this fact? But I mean, the only thing that you can really legitimately derive from that is that at this certain point in time, somebody said through the mechanism of Wikipedia that the sky was blue. There is no Wikipedia that either did or didn't say that.
Sure, that makes sense to me. Although I certainly cite Wikipedia a lot, and I'll cite it often in the context of Wikipedia defines something as such and such, and usually what I'm doing is I'm taking that first line from the article, and that first line is very often not sourced. It very often represents what's a good word? A summation of what's going to follow in the article. Yeah. But I would never say, right, some person on Wikipedia once wrote that the definition of such and such is such and such, particularly if that phrasing has lasted for a long time.
Yeah, well, I think that's I think that starts to that becomes a bit more reasonable. And I think partly your judgment in saying something like that, you're someone who has a pretty good understanding of how Wikipedia works, which that's already part of the critique I was bringing in that blog post.
Right.
And I would imagine that you would that you might use a phrase like that not in a context where you're trying to use it to demonstrate a controversial definition of something, but more as sort of a scaffolding to say, broadly, here's what this topic is about.
Sure, yeah. Right?
And I've heard of even court cases where that sort of thing, where Wikipedia content has been used to sort of assess broad public sentiment. I think we should always be a little bit skeptical of stuff like that, but there might be places where it's perfectly appropriate, as long as we're not just sort of jumping to it without a second thought.
I'm actually skeptical of everything.
Yeah.
So my issue comes from the other direction, not being too trusting, but being not trusting enough.
Uh-huh.
I look at a sentence, even the first sentence in a Wikipedia article, and I'm asking, who wrote that? Why did they want to write that? And why is it important that they thought that's what I should think about this subject?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the issues that I try to read that way as well. But I think the reality is there's a whole lot of people in the world that don't take that approach when they're reading really much of anything.
Yeah. Now, so this is an odd phrasing, but I think it works in the context of this discussion, and certainly the direction that I'm thinking in terms of consensus. Would you say it's the design of the platform, the technology and the ways the technology has been implemented that creates the consensus? Or is it the people who are using the platform that create the consensus?
That's a good question. I think like as far as the design of the platform, it seems to me, and this is something I've tried to capture and break down, and will probably return to in some future blog posts. I think if we look at the Wikipedia software, there's a lot to be learned about what are the conditions, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for effective collaboration. So there are certain things that Wikipedia provides, like every time someone makes a change, it keeps a record of that change.
Right.
It keeps the earlier version and it keeps the later version, and it presents us in a way that allows me to go into something, and if you made a change, I can perceive what that change was. You have an ability to explain why you're making that change, so I can see that. The software makes it easy for me to see that. If I want to undo what you did, it's easy for me to do that. If I want to granularly look at your change, like if I don't believe your description of what your change was, and I think you were being disingenuous, I can look at actually what the change was and see that. So there are, I think there's sort of a minimum set of these kinds of characteristics that the Wikipedia software meets, that permits people to, it sort of gets the software out of the way. Okay. And sort of it creates a space in which we can interact and have confidence in understanding what each other are doing and in our ability to communicate about it, that kind of allows us to just be us. So in that sense, I would say, like, I think in broad themes, I think the software of Wikipedia does a good job at kind of giving us that minimum set of tools. When you get really specific, there might be places where it kind of falls short. But I think the ideal is that Wikipedia promotes individuals as decision makers and gets out of the way. And I think it does a reasonably good job of accomplishing that.
So that's an interesting way of putting it. I've always thought of Wikipedia as a centralized platform. It's almost like you're describing it as decentralized, because it's individual people making the decisions.
Well, centralized or decentralized in what way? I mean, I think you could describe it as either one. So tell me more about.
Well, and you've returned to this phrasing a few times, right? There's no entity called Wikipedia that makes a statement, for example, or it's Wikipedia isn't the thing you trust; it's the individual facts or the individual sources that you trust. All of those are things that you would say of a decentralized system and not a centralized system.
So, yeah, so I mean, there is kind of an inescapable fact, and I don't mean to gloss over it, that there is a central corpus, right? There is, like when I go to Wikipedia at any given point in time, if you look at a Wikipedia article and I look at a Wikipedia article, we're looking at the same central thing.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I think it's worth noting that, like, so Ward Cunningham, who invented wiki software several years before Wikipedia, has been working on what he calls the Federated Wiki in recent years. And I mean, I think this concept of federation, actually, I think the way I understand it, I think he's one of the sort of originators of the concept, but it's gone into a lot of other software as well. I think you mentioned Mastodon before, which is a decentralized social network platform. So the notion of a wiki is kind of changing, and that federated version is essentially that I would have my own collection of web pages in this software, and you would have your own collection of web pages. And if I wanted to pull something from yours and modify it, I could do that. But each one of us kind of has our own space. So that would probably be like a more decentralized, like if Wikipedia were truly decentralized, it would probably look a lot more like that. There would not be one central corpus, but there would be your version of Wikipedia that might have a lot of articles about e-learning. There would be my version of Wikipedia that might have a lot of articles about Oregon and some learning, and some of that would be the same as in what's in yours, and some of it would be slightly modified, and some of it might even be radically different.
Do you think that would work?
I would love to try. I'd love to see where it goes. And I think that's sort of I guess with that, I'm sort of trying to echo the origins of Wikipedia too. If you go back to 2001 when Wikipedia was started, it was originally started as as sort of an experiment to try to populate a more traditional encyclopedia project. Right. To try to generate content more quickly for something that was moving slowly. So there wasn't, at the very beginning, there wasn't necessarily a strong belief, oh, this is something that's going to work. This is going to be a top 5 website. There might have been people who wanted it to go in that direction, but there wasn't like a strong core belief that was definitely that a lot of people were bought into. And so I think in that same spirit, I'd love to see what it would look like if we had a sort of a more decentralized effort in an encyclopedia, and whether that would end up being something that's broadly valuable to society, I'm not sure.
Yeah. The openness is an important factor, isn't it?
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about that. Why is openness better? How's that for a leading question?
Yeah. Well, I think there's openness of
provenance.
let's try to talk about openness in a. I mean, there are many different ways to look at it. There's openness of process. There's there's like transparency in decision making. There's open access in the sources that we use. So what piece of it should we start with?
I'm, well, of course, most interested in open process, I think. Although the open, and we could talk about licensing too, but I don't want to go there.
Can leave that for another day.
Yeah, let's do.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think open process is a very strongly held core value in Wikipedia. And it's sort of the idea that that an article on any topic might be improved by allowing someone that you might not think to reach out to let me be a little more specific. Like if I if I want to write an article about a church in my neighborhood, and and maybe I start that Wikipedia article because I know something about the architect and it's an interesting piece of architecture. And I write the article and it sits there for 6 months or a year. And then all of a sudden someone adds a new section to that article that's a story about like a conflict within the congregation that happened 20 years ago that ended up getting some coverage in the news, and maybe it led to a split in the church and a community went and started another church. Well, that was never my original idea. I thought it was physically an interesting building. Right. But by creating it on an open platform that has open processes that allow anyone to come along and make improvements, that's what allowed that article to become richer. That, you know, now it has a whole dimension of information that I never intended. And I think, you know, and let me give a more specific, let me give a real example of that. So here in Oregon, like a lot of my work has been on you know, articles about Oregon. So like the Oregonian newspaper is the biggest paper in the state, and if you look at a number of like, so it's had some big accomplishments. It's an important institution. It's a well-respected institution, and it's also had some big scandals. So like the one that sticks out in my mind is it was heavily criticized in the 1990s when it essentially suppressed a story that was almost certainly a determining factor in a U.S. Senate race. Right? There were growing rumors that the incumbent senator had problems around sexual harassment over spanning decades, I think, and the paper intentionally sat on that story until after the election, and it was a very close election. That story ended up being broken by the Washington Post, 3,000 miles away.
Oops.
So if you look up information about the Oregonian and you find it in more traditional publications that might be, you know, maybe from like the local historical society or, you know, other institutions that might kind of be connected with the paper. Maybe the editor is a former editor of the Oregonian. Maybe they don't particularly want to tell that part of the story.
Right.
You put it on an open platform, and if that story was well documented, that's been well covered in publications, not just locally, but around the country, then that's going to end up in Wikipedia. And it's not going to be, we're going to, and so like, I don't know whether the Wikipedia article is, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's better than the article in like the Oregon Encyclopedia or something like that. That's more centrally produced. But what it is that I think is important is it's different.
Mm-hmm.
And so having some diversity in the information that we consume, I think is important. So there are almost certainly going to be ways in which that more formally, centrally produced article is going to be worthwhile. There's going to be stuff in there that we might not read in the others. Maybe the overall balance of it is going to be better. But then there's going to be stuff in the Wikipedia article there's going to be aspects of that that's better as well.
There's the other side of that too. Somebody takes the time and creates an article on Wikipedia, and then 30 seconds later, someone comes along and says, "Marked for deletion."
Yeah.
How does that work? It doesn't seem like you can do much to stop that, and then the article disappears and the openness is gone.
Yeah. Well, I think just to kind of defend that practice broadly, I think something that often gets overlooked in discussions about stuff like this is that making decisions around sort of what the edges of Wikipedia look like, it's an important aspect of forming an identity and forming a brand, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. At a certain point, wherever that point is, to make itself a thing that everybody can have some similar understanding of, there have to be just some decisions around what gets included and what doesn't. And I think every publication makes decisions around that. Wikipedia is more transparent in its process in making those decisions than other publications. And so I think, and also there's this strong sense of openness. So I think people tend to be more critical of those decisions with Wikipedia than other publications. So I think when I guess about 10 or 12 years ago, there was a big discussion. There was a big sort of controversy around how those decisions would be made with Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. And that's when it was established that Wikipedia should be based on strong sourcing. And there was the notability guideline was established that basically said you shouldn't have an article about something in Wikipedia unless it's been covered by several independent sources. And there are still people who feel strongly that that decision went the wrong way and that Wikipedia should be more inclusive. The thing that I would like people to consider is that we do know that a Wikipedia that made that decision, that made the decision to be kind of brutal in some of those decisions and just delete stuff rather than include it. We know that led to a website that's a top 5 website that people consult frequently, that is sort of that has this sort of central location in our media landscape, right? We don't know what would have happened if it went the other way. We can't know. Mm-hmm. Maybe it would have been better. Maybe it would have been more valued. I kind of doubt it. I think that Wikipedia as it is currently constructed has hit sort of a higher pinnacle than I would have expected it to. So while I can't say that I think that we should respect on some level that this is the version of Wikipedia that has worked. Right. And if it was as bad as some people say it is, then Wikipedia would have crashed and burned long ago, and that didn't happen.
Well, yeah, but the National Enquirer succeeded and didn't crash and burn. So, there's the presumption that more read means more true, right. And I would certainly question that presumption.
Yeah, no, that's not. I'm not trying to make that claim. Yeah, I see that. Yeah,
yeah.
But I think the other aspect of this is, if we're going to be critical of Wikipedia from a perspective of, like, are the things presented in Wikipedia true, mm-hmm. and are they contextualized? And Wikipedia is a low trust environment, or the internet is a low trust environment, then you need to go to something else to make those determinations.
Right.
That's something else. Those are the sources that Wikipedia is citing. If Wikipedia is trying to cover something that has not been well covered in well-trusted sources elsewhere, then how on earth could we possibly establish trust in that?
Well, that's a good question, right? Now, and that gets us actually away from, Wikipedia, bad or evil, to, I'm just kidding, to just the basis for truth formation in the first place. When you said that, the thought crossed my mind, well, if you threatened every contributor to Wikipedia with a flogging if they put in false information, that would probably also result in true information on Wikipedia, but probably isn't a socially acceptable method of achieving truth.
Right.
Yeah. Really isn't. I don't. And it's really a terrible concept. But I think of other distributed trustless systems. Most recently, we have blockchain, right, where the motivation in that case is financial incentive. It costs you too much money to fake the blockchain. I'm wondering, are there other incentives or mechanisms that you think might be equally effective? You know, could we establish truth or something approximating truth, or could you establish, let's go more minimal, could you establish consensus in an environment where we couldn't just defer the question to trusted sources? What do you think?
Say a little more, I guess. I'm not sure which part to grab onto.
Okay, so let's suppose for some reason, whatever the reason, it was determined that in fact publication is untrustworthy, that we can't rely on it, that you know the publishers are determined to be beholden to, say, commercial interests or the Illuminati or some whatever, right? So one day we wake up and we can no longer trust newspapers, books, magazines, journals. Could Wikipedia even operate in that environment?
Well, yeah, I think Wikipedia has an important role in an environment like that. The example that comes to mind for me is a couple years ago, there was a decision on Wikipedia to generally not use the Daily Mail as a source, and that was the Daily Mail didn't respond well to that, and it sort of became this very very stormy sort of, there was sort of this back and forth about who was better and stuff like that. And I was, I did some blogging around that. But I think overall, I think that was a good,
it was the right
thing. And I don't say that because I have a strong view of whether or not Wikipedia made the right decision, about whether or not the group of people who made that decision made the right decision.
Right.
I think it was a good thing because it focused a lot of people's attention on the need to evaluate a source of information in a complex environment. And I certainly learned some things about the Daily Mail that I hadn't known before, things that both in its favor and against it. I think my understanding of the Daily Mail improved as a result of following that, from really in both directions. The Daily Mail's defense of itself opened my eyes to where they've maybe done some better reporting than I had been aware of. And also a lot of the points that were made against it were pretty compelling. The main takeaway that I got from that was that the Daily Mail as like the core publication, and the Mail Online, which is a somewhat distinctly branded entity, are really pretty different. That a lot of the criticism, a lot of the problems that people have had with the publication have been around the Mail Online. A lot of the mistakes and sort of false reporting and stuff like that. And it seems to me that they have actually maintained some integrity with the sort of the core publication. But what they've failed to do is really make it clear which is which, and make it clear that they have different standards that they apply to both of them. So if they would kind of be clearer in their branding, then it would be easier for Wikipedians, and it would be easier for the public in general to better evaluate what they're reading from one or the other.
So I guess what you're saying, if I'm going to read into this a bit, is that if the sources that we currently have prove to be untrustworthy, you'd find different sources that would be trustworthy. I know you're not saying that, but that seems to be what follows from what you're saying. More or less?
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Yeah.
I think I see where you're going, but yeah, I think that's basically the working theory of Wikipedia.
Yeah. One last thing, and then I think we should wrap up. Because I also think, especially when I think of decision making things or truth making things or whatever. You notice I'm trying to be really vague here. That involve many distinct entities, like as you mentioned, 10,000 people. I also think of artificial intelligent processes, because a lot of artificial intelligent processes mirror in many important ways interactions among large groups of people, like the 10,000 people in Wikipedia. One of the criticisms of artificial intelligence that's common to criticisms of Wikipedia is the idea that there's a bias in the inputs, which produces a bias in the output. And of course, the most recent celebrated case, at least in my world, around that was the recent woman who won a Nobel Prize, whose article in Wikipedia was slated for deletion, and I think actually deleted, suggesting that that kind of bias might exist in Wikipedia as well. It's an intractable problem for artificial intelligence. Is it also an intractable problem for Wikipedia?
I think it probably is. I think it's an intractable problem for Wikipedia and really for the world at large. When we have when there are huge classes of people that are more advantaged than others, whether that's gender or race or education level or any number of dimensions. Those kinds of problems tend to self-perpetuate. And Wikipedia is certainly a place where some of that self-perpetuation happens. I think it's also a place where many people are deliberating creative solutions to those kinds of issues. So I think that it's always worthwhile to consider whether Wikipedia, the content of Wikipedia, is giving you biased content that might be reflecting and amplifying biases that are elsewhere in the world. But also, we can look at Wikipedia as an opportunity if we want to, if we feel that women scientists are not adequately represented in the information that we consume. Wikipedia is a place where anyone can address that. Write an article about a woman scientist that isn't already there. And there are many people who look at Wikipedia who take that kind of action on Wikipedia. It's sort of an opportunity to counter some of that.
Right. Yeah. And of course, and I've seen some of the efforts to counter that. Of course, the original article that was written about a woman scientist was slated for deletion. So there is that kind of thing that happens.
Well, and some of that comes down to the individuals working towards it. Another example of that is there's a recently elected member of Congress in the U.S., Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who she won the primary election, which was the closely contested one in May, and many people were immediately shocked that her Wikipedia entry had been deleted several months before. But what got missed, I think, in that discussion is that people were shocked that she won. Right, every political pundit was shocked that she won. Right. It was like the fact that she was going to, like, nobody at Wikipedia or anywhere else had a crystal ball knowing that she was going to win that early round of it. And if you look back in the history of Wikipedia, which you have the ability to do with Wikipedia more than other publications, you could see that someone did try to start a biography of her much earlier, but they didn't establish that she was a significant figure. They didn't. The source materials didn't really exist at that point. And what they did, the thing that they presented to Wikipedia, I would certainly have deleted as well. And I think most reasonable people would have, because it didn't appear to reflect someone who was who crossed any of Wikipedia's notability guidelines. Now, that doesn't mean that someone could not have gotten an article published. If somebody more familiar with Wikipedia's standards and willing to put their time into doing a lot of research and doing a lot, putting the work into writing it up in a way that it was clear that this was someone who should be discussed on Wikipedia, it might have been successful. Mm-hmm. But the simple fact is nobody did that before that election.
So you've got to be, I don't want to say pay to play, but you've got to put in the effort, basically. I mean, I really worry about things like that because to me, and again, this is skeptic me speaking, that kind of process really entrenches existing power structures. You point to the fact that nobody, that there weren't articles talking about her, but of course there weren't articles talking about her because she's a women socialist who doesn't belong in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, say. So there is a certain perpetuation here of existing class and status differences, which are really concerning. Not to say that that's unique to Wikipedia by any means. It exists in artificial intelligence, and probably even more so in traditional media, which is, of course, I think the source of this kind of selective coverage of certain individuals or as opposed to others. And just to be clear, I'm a Wikipedia fan. I've cited it many, many times. I refer to it always. It's my go-to when I'm looking up something I don't know about. It's my go-to. But then, as I know you would say, right, follow the references. Look at the sources that Wikipedia refers to. I think that's, and it's not, I think where we maybe differ is, I think it's not about the source, and maybe we don't differ here. I think it's about the range of sources. I would never trust one source on anything, and that's the cardinal rule of journalism, right? Publish nothing unless you have two sources for it. And that's probably true of encyclopedias as well.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap it up here, I think, not because I want to, but because I don't want to take more of your time than we agreed to originally, and because, of course, we have to be fair to our viewers as well, who have, things like lives.
I would say on that last point, I think we're in agreement on that point. Mm. I think any difference is just a surface difference, is just semantics.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I encourage people watching this video to follow up. Do you want to give them a web page to look at?
Yeah, so I put a couple of links in here to specific policy pages on Wikipedia. My website is wikistrategies.net, which is kind of focused on my business, but I also have a blog there that goes into a lot of broader questions. I haven't really I didn't think about a central web page to point people at. So
that's fine. It's just I want to make sure that people have a place where they can follow up for more information. Wiki Strategies, by the way, is all one word and it's all lowercase .net. So thank you.
There's a contact page there as well if people want to shoot an email.
That's great, and I'm sure you would encourage them to follow up if they have something they want to talk to you about. So, Pete, it's been a pleasure. A really interesting discussion. I hope you didn't see me as being too critical of Wikipedia. Like I say, I really like it. And it does raise...
Wikipedia invites and needs critics. So, I appreciate all that.
And it's actually addressing the wider question of how we create consensus in society, where consensus is so very hard to achieve. So I certainly appreciate the project. That's it for e-learning 3.0 conversation with series, whatever you want to call it, for today. Thank you, everyone. We've had viewers throughout, and I'm sure we'll have viewers of the recording, which will be, of course, available almost immediately on the e-learning 3.0 website. So, Pete, thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you again.
Thank you.